All right, so this is what I like to call my talk point, okay? Keep business logic separate from everything else, okay? All right, so actually, I want everybody to stand up. Come on, let's stand up. You know, typical Sunday school teacher fashion, right? Everybody please stand up, and I want you to read this all together, right? A resounding chorus. I want you to read this all together. You ready? 3, 2, 1. Keep business logic separate from everything. All right, very good. Sige guys, you can sit down, but before you sit down, you know, make sure you say hi. People next to you, greet them. Hello, happy PyCon, right? Woo! Okay, great. Okay, so let's dissect that a little bit, right? Keep business logic separate from everything else, okay? This is what we want, okay? But you know, if you're not like into the field for a long time, maybe you're new, right? What exactly is business logic, right? So I've been in the business for a while, and I still kind of don't know what business logic is, right? What is business logic? Well, let's say business logic. It's basically like it's the core of your application, right? So I'm talking about let's say you're working for Grab, right? You're a programmer. Not a driver, like a programmer at Grab. And I would say the core of your application would be like the logic that pairs riders and drivers, right? So that would be business logic. Let's say you're working for Honest Bee, then the core of your application would be something like making sure that the grocery list items that you ordered will get sent to the partner app, right? So that's business logic. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's still kind of vague, right? But I do know what business logic is not, right? So we write these codes, these types of code all the time, and okay, so here's one: URL routing. That's not business logic, right? We don't really care if you're using Django or Flask. Right, that's not really super important. Doesn't really matter if you use the app URL decorator or maybe you're using URL routes. Doesn't really matter. Okay, handling get and post parameters. This is still not business logic. This is just you trying to make it work, right? It's not really making decisions. Okay, next we have rendering HTML. Even that's just displaying data, right? That's just you fetching data from the database and just rendering HTML. That's not really business logic. And finally, I have another example. Returning JSON from an API. Also not a business logic. These are things that you need to make an app, but this isn't business logic, right? So this can just stay, URL routing can just stay in URL stuff. Get post parameters, that'll be in your controllers or views, JSON rendering HTML, right? So basically, what we don't want is, we don't want the business logic to mix with these things, right? So maybe you're new to web development, so you just write everything in the views file if you're using Django, or you just write everything in one file in Flask, right? All of the business logics, 200-line functions, right? Okay, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't mix business logic with presentational logic, basically. Okay. So, but how do you keep business logic separate from your presentational logic, right? How do you do that? Well, okay, so this is what my talk is all about. It's about service objects, right? So I'll show you an example of a service object because I feel like examples are a very good way to learn. All right. So here's some code. That's big enough, right? Okay. This is a service object. Oh, had an error. Okay. So it's a class, starts with a verb. It does not end in service, right? So don't make a service called register user service, okay? Just register user, that's fine. And also you might notice that it kind of looks like Django Forms. If you use Django, it kind of looks like Django Forms, right? You have the fields. That's not a coincidence. That's because service objects, they're implemented as subclasses of the Django form, right? So, by the way, in this talk, I'm going to be talking from the perspective of a Django developer, but service objects, it's not limited to like framework or language, right? So originally, I actually got this idea from Rails. I'm not a Rails developer, but I feel like service objects is a big thing in the Rails world, and so I'm stealing it, right? So here we go. Next, we have the process method, right? So you have a class called whatever your service is. In this case, it's register user. And then we have the process method, and this is where the magic happens, right? So this is where your business logic lives, okay? If you're ever wondering, when you're writing a project, you're coding in Python, you're using Flask, or you're using Django, whatever, where do I put my business logic? There. That's where you put your business logic, okay? Very, very clear. You put it in the process method of a service object. So in this case, we have in this particular example, we have register user, which is a service that registers a user, obviously, right? Because that's what it's called. So we accept an email, password, and a Boolean, subscribe to newsletter, okay? And inside the process method, we create a user, and then we check if they're subscribed or not, okay? And then at the end, we actually we actually use another service object to send a welcome email, okay? So that's actually how you execute the service objects. You call the static method execute, and you pass in the parameters, okay? All right, so essentially that's what that's what service objects are. Okay, so thank you for listening. No, I'm just kidding, it's not done. Register user.execute, so this is how you would use it if you're using the register user service. Okay, so this is a simple example. Okay, so another cool thing about service objects is that are you guys familiar with database transactions? Right? So database transaction is making sure it's like atomic transactions. That is, when you create data on a database, you want to be able to roll that back in case something goes wrong, right? So in this example, let's say we create the user, and we send the welcome email, but then sending the welcome email fails for some reason. We don't want to keep that user around, right? Because it failed, the registration failed for some reason. So the service object, what it actually does is that when there's an exception, when you raise an exception inside here, it counters an exception, it rolls back the changes, right? So this is based on Django's, transaction.atomic decorator, right? So all of the code that runs inside the process method is a transaction. So it's inside a transaction, okay? Cool, so yeah. So what you can notice here also is, you might think, so it's using Django Forms, right? So maybe you know how to use Django Forms. What it does is that you pass it, like here, you pass it a dictionary, and it validates those fields, right? So it makes sure that the email that you're entering is actually a valid email address. It checks that the password is, like the requirements that you want. All of that is included. So that means whenever you run the service, whenever you execute the service, you're going to be sure that you're in a correct state, right? So the state is valid. It's never not valid, because if it's not valid, it'll throw an error. Okay. So to actually show you guys a bit more of how to use this pattern, like in real world applications, we're actually going to be building an app, okay? So the app is called, it's something that we're developing. Let's see. It's called buo.ph, right? Okay, so let's see. Yeah, there we go. So this is it's basically a donation website. So if you want to, so the idea is creators or organizations or causes, they can create an account, and then people can donate to their cause, right? And it's different from all the other stuff, all the other platforms like Patreon or Twitch alerts if you're into live streaming games. It's different in that it actually supports coins.ph. So that means you don't need a bank account, you don't need a credit card to be able to donate to the causes that you want to. Okay, so we're going to be building this app live on the stage right now, right? Isn't that amazing? Isn't it? No, I'm just kidding. So here's what we have so far. I'm going to run the server. So we have a Django server. We have a Django server running. Let's just run that. Okay, so we go to localhost 1000. And Firefox is installing updates. Right? Amazing. Okay. All right. So it's not that. The URL is /u/ the username of the person. Okay. All right. So this is what we have so far. The projector is a bit, so I'm going to move it to the left. There. This is what we have so far. So I coded the template. I made the interface, so the buttons are clickable and you can enter some stuff. But it doesn't do anything. So actually when you send, like it just goes back, right? It doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything smart. So what we're going to do now is we're going to implement that core functionality of the app, which is to make a donation using service objects, okay? Okay, so I'm going to show you the code that we have right now. So you saw the UI a while ago. We also have the views. Okay, so this is a Django view. Again, you can implement this using Flask, but in this case, this is a Django view. It's a form view, so that I don't have to write all of that form handling stuff. All it does right now is it basically just returns the template. It doesn't do anything. Okay, and then we also have a form. So this is a form view. That means we need a form. There's a form called donate form. And this is basically a form. So earlier in the UI, we saw that there's choices for amount. So we implemented that here. This is all just basic Django stuff. Oh, by the way, if you're using Flask, you can probably implement service objects using WT forms, which is, the pattern is quite similar to Django Forms. Okay. And then we have a clean method here. It basically checks. So our requirements are you need to have at least a mobile number or an email address. So these are both not required, but one of them is required. So we have a custom validation logic for that. Okay. Next, the actual models. In this case, we only have one model, the donation model. The donation model represents a donation. So when somebody makes a donation, a new donation object is created. It contains the recipient, who the donation should go to, amount, which is how much, message, which is an optional message in case you want to say something to the people you're sending the money to, sender name, which is your name. It's optional if you want to remain anonymous. Email, mobile number is your mobile number. Okay. It also has additional fields for payment gateway. So in the future, I'd like to be able to add different payment gateways. So it has a payment gateway field here. And also, lastly, we have payment gateway data, which is different payment gateways. They have different structures for data. So in this case, we're using JSON field, which if you're using Postgres is actually really cool. It allows you to store JSON in your Postgres, and you can query it and stuff like that. Okay. Cool. That's basically it. So that's all I've written. There's no services yet. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. So to start with, because I am a responsible developer, I'm going to write tests. Okay. Guys, you have to write your tests, okay? Writing tests is like brushing your teeth. You have to do it. Okay. So I'm going to set up the test class. Okay, so we've made a test case, and we're going to make a test method. What should I call it? Test test donation, right? Something. This is how we name variables. Okay, so what do we actually want to happen when we call make donation? We want to create a donation object, and at the same time, when the donation object is created, when you click continue, it should redirect you to the payment gateway, right? So it's like a checkout process. Okay, so that means we first create the donation object, and then we call the CoinsPH API and get back a payment request, which will give us the payment URL to redirect to, so that people can pay. Okay, so how do they implement this? Okay, so let's pretend that the service object is already created, right? TDD, red, green, refactor. So I'm gonna pretend that services already exist, right? The service make donation already exists. This doesn't actually work. This will fail, but that's what you do with TDD. Okay, we make a donation. Oh wait, first of all, we need to create a user to donate to, right? You can't donate to nothing. So we'll create a user. We're gonna call the username is, let's say PyCon wants to make an account for this, right? Give PyCon your money, guys. We need to support them. Okay, password hunter21 because it's too short. Okay. All right, we need to import that. All right, so we're creating a user. Next, we're gonna call make donation, which is the service. So again, you call it using the static method execute, and you're gonna pass in the recipient, right? The recipient is gonna be the user. We're not gonna pass in the instance, we're just gonna pass in the ID, because that's how Django Forms work. We're gonna pass in an amount. So how much do we want to donate? Like 50 pesos? Like 500. 500 is fine. The two extra, these are decimal places. Okay, so it's an integer, but the last two are decimal places. Okay, next we need the name, right? So the sender name. Who's donating? Sony will donate. Okay. He's donating to his own. What a supportive trustee. Okay, sender name, sender email. Okay, so what's Sony's email address? Sony at, this is probably real, like I'm not sure, right? We're not gonna enter a mobile number because you just need one. Okay, and then we're gonna, set the message. You guys could do better. Okay, there we go. All right, so I think that's it. And then, all right, so this is the test, and now we're gonna verify that it works by writing assertions. So this is like a talkception. This is how you do TDD. Okay, so we want to make sure. Oh yeah, first we want to make sure that there's like actually a donation on the database. Okay. And then we want to make sure that the donation object contains the actual values that we passed in. So we want to make sure that the recipient is the user. Okay. Then we want to make sure that the amount is actually 500 pesos. Then we want to make sure that sender name, all of that is the same. Oh, this is actually wrong, is it? Yeah, sorry, yeah, like that, okay. Donation.sender email, we want to make sure that is Sony at PyCon, okay, forgot the name. Oh, it's sender name. I'm a bit worried now that this isn't actually his last name. Okay. You guys could do better. Right, so we're making sure that all the data is correct. We also want to make sure that it did actually call the CoinsPH API, right? So we want to make sure that the payment URL is set, right? So if we go to the donation model, we can see that we have a property here. It's called payment URL. And what it does is that if the payment gateway is CoinsPH, it will return payment URL from the JSON data, okay? So we want to make sure that we're calling the CoinsPH API. So we want to make sure that at least the payment URL actually has a value. So I just used assert true just to make sure that it has a value. While we're here, let's also make sure that the payment gateway is actually CoinsPH. Right. Donation.coinsph, that's this. It's just a static string. Okay, so we need to fix those imports. What's the name? Donation. All right, is that it? Okay, so that should be it. I mean, like, if this test passes, that means it works, right? So let's go ahead and run the test. Python manage.pytest. I'm going to add a K so it's faster. And it failed, right? No module found apps donate services. That's because we haven't actually written the service. Okay. So now that we've written the test, it's time to write the actual service. So I'm going to make a new file, services.py. All right. And then I'm going to make the service. So the base class is a library. It's called service objects. This is the base class. We're going to make, make donation, right, service. Okay. And then let's see if our tests are better now. All right, so it still failed, but now it has a different error, not implemented. That's because we didn't put a process method, right? So let's actually just write the service now. What does it take? It takes a recipient, which is a user object. So for that, we're going to be using Django's model choice field. Right, so this is to verify that it's actually a user. Also the amount. So the amount is supposed to be an integer, right? So this is required. Sender name is a character field, which is not required. Again, you can be anonymous. Also, sender email is email field. This is also not required. Sender mobile number. Now this is a bit weird because we're going to use a library that lets us store phone numbers, phone number field, okay? So there's a library called Django phone number field or something that lets us store phone numbers. Next, we're going to store the message. I think that's it, right? So after this, I think that should be good. Okay, so this is also not required. All right. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. Now we have to write the process method where the magic actually happens. Okay, so we're going to make a donation object, right? The donation recipient will be, so like how you access data in a form, this is how you access data in a service using clean data. These are just implementation details. Recipient. Okay. And then we have sender name, email, mobile number. Oh, wait, no, amount. Sender name, sender email, sender mobile number, and then finally we have sender message. Okay. So let's see what happens to our tests now. Oh, have to fix the imports. We'll do import forms, and then the user is at from django.contrib.auth.models import user. And then phone number field, OMG, I forgot. Where is it? Phone number fields? Fields? Form fields, import phone number field. Okay, I think that's correct. Oh, also the model, we need to import the model. From .models import donation. All right, okay. So let's see if our tests, like how it's faring now. Failed because sender message is an invalid keyword argument for this function. What? Sender message, is that not what it's called? Sender. Oh, it's just message. Why did I not? Okay, cool. All right, let's see what happens. This is the cool thing about tests. You can just, that's how you know if it works. Okay, violates not null constraint. Oh, that's because this is returning none because it's not required, right? So it's returning none. Instead, the default value should be a, like an empty string, not none, right? So not none, empty string. Okay. All right, and let's see if our tests make any progress. Okay, it still failed. Donation object has no attribute sender message. What? Wait, did I save it? I think I didn't save it. Oh, okay, it's in the test. It's failing in the test. So right now is the time I'm wondering why I decided to do live coding. I thought it would be fun. They told me it would be fun. Okay, there we go. Fix that. And okay, it still fails. Oh, but now we get a different error. Now we're getting payment gateway is not equal to coins.ph. That's because we're not calling the actual callback yet, right? So let's go ahead and call the callback, the coins.ph, API. So by default, let's just make it coins.ph, right? Payment gateway is donation.coins.ph. All right. And then I actually already wrote the API for coins.ph. I already wrote it. It's in from, what is it? Buo.utils import create payment request. Okay. So we're gonna call the coins.ph API now, and we're gonna return the data to payment gateway data. Okay, so it'll return a dictionary which will get saved to the database. Okay, so you pass in the amount, which is, let's just use donation.amount. We're gonna pass in the email, which is donation.email. Nope, sender email. And we're also gonna pass in sender mobile number. Right, so that's all coins.ph needs, just needs an email or a mobile number. Okay, and then we're gonna save the object, and then finally we're gonna return the object. Okay. Okay, cool. So this will call the coins.ph API. It will return the data, the payment gateway data, and we'll save it to the database and then return the object. Okay, let's see if our tests now pass. Oh, look at that, it passed. Wow, didn't think I'd get to that point. Okay, so, all right, so now we have a working service, right? But we still need to integrate it to our actual UI, our controller, okay? But at least now we're confident that it actually works. So we'll go to the Donate view, and this is a form view, so it subclasses from form view. Now the Django docs, they tell me that all I have to do to accept the post request is to define a method called form valid, and it will receive self and the form. And then it's assumed that it's already valid at this point. Okay, now we're gonna so now we're gonna call the service from our controller. So service is called make donation. We're going to execute it. Actually, to save time, I'm just going to copy this call. And yep, I'm just going to copy this. There. Okay, so the recipient will be, oh, it's actually in, no, it's in self.recipient. Okay, self.recipient.pk. The amount, whatever was submitted to the form. Okay. The sender name, again, whatever was submitted to the form. I think the form actually just has name on it. Yeah. Form cleaned data email. Nope, making it worse. Okay. And then finally, form cleaned data message. Form cleaned data message. Okay. So that should make a donation. And it will also call the CoinsPH API and will save the payment gateway data. So now we can get the payment URL, right? So now we have a payment URL. So what we want to happen is that when we click continue, it should redirect to the payment URL. So we're gonna call the Django method redirect. That's how you redirect your user. And then we're gonna pass in the payment URL. All right. Fix the imports. Okay. All right. Oh wait, okay, fix the imports. Redirect this in the shortcuts module. Trust me guys, if you've been doing this for a long time, you're gonna memorize where everything is. Okay, I think that should work. We're gonna call the make donation service and we're gonna redirect to the payment URL, okay? So let's see if this actually works. No, don't do that. Okay, so we're gonna donate 1,000. Okay, I'm gonna put my name and I'm gonna put my email address because I don't want to show my number. Message, you guys are awesome. Okay, so let's see what happens. We should get redirected to CoinsPH at this point. All right, cool. So sorry guys, it's not actually CoinsPH at this point because, well, I mean, this is what you get if you just have 6 hours to work on a project. But let's pretend that it is, right? Whatever payment gateway, you've done this before, credit card transaction, whatever, CoinsPH, whatever, right? And then you give them your credit card details and then money and then whatever. Let's use our imagination, okay? And then finally, we get redirected back to the app. And there we go. Thank you. All right. So congratulations, guys, on your first service. I know I did it, but couldn't have done it without you. Okay, so what did we see there? Well, we saw a lot of things. A lot of things happened, but mostly it's just the service object, okay? First, we wrote the test. Then we wrote the actual service. And then we integrated it with our code. And it's like really easy, right? And you might think, well, what's the purpose of all that, right? Can't I just have like written the code here, right? That creates the user, creates the donation, does the payment request. Can't I just have done it here, like this, right here? Well, I mean, you could, and probably that's what you're doing now. But what you get with service objects is that it's very easy to reuse your code. It's very dry, right? All of your business logic are just in service objects. All of it, right? Service objects, it's what your app does, right? If you open one of my projects and you go to the services directory, you will know right away what the app does. It's very obvious. Verb, noun, right? That's just it. Number one, makes your business logic easily testable, right? So if you were not using service objects, what you would have had to do is write a test for the view, right? And you would make an HTTP request, and then you would test that it actually validates, and you would test that it returns the correct thing, and then you would test the database if it's correct, all of that. But if you're using service objects, you don't have to test the entire stack, right? You just test the business logic. That makes your tests faster, and it just makes testing easier. You can test the URL routing like in other places, right? But test your business logic in isolation. So next, you can call service objects from anywhere. So in the example that we did earlier, we wrote the service objects and we used it in the test. We used it in the view. But you can also use it in, let's say you have a management command, you have a command line interface, you're not using Django at all. Maybe you have cron jobs. Maybe you have like in async workers, like in RQ and stuff like that. You can call business logic from anywhere if you use service objects. If you just put them in the views, then that limits you. Your business logic will only run when somebody hits an endpoint, right? Okay. Input validation as part of your business rules. So this is an important thing that I told you guys about earlier, is that validating your inputs, that's kind of part of your business logic. You want to make sure that you can only make a donation when somebody actually has an account. You want to make sure that the sender has at least an email or a mobile number, and all of that is included in the service object. And finally, it's just easier to keep the thing in your head, right? It's easier to reason about that this is what your app does if it's all just in one place, right? If you're writing controllers, the only thing you should be worried about is parsing the get parameters, the post parameters, and then rendering HTML in the way that you want it to be, right? You don't want to be worrying about the actual business rules while you're writing the controller. The controller, it's kind of like, it's just the glue, right? But the business logic, that's the core of your application. Okay, so let's see. What are the alternatives to service objects? Okay, so these are the things that I did before using service objects. Just put code anywhere. So this is what I did before, right? Should I put the code in views? Well, I mean, the Django docs, they don't tell us otherwise, right? So I would just put it in the views. Sometimes I would make functions and then I would call them. Sometimes I would adhere to the fat models approach, which is you have the model and then you add methods to it, and then that's where your business logic goes, right? I feel like those approaches, they're not super good because, for instance, fat models. You're making a donation, right? So you would make a method called donate or something to the donation object model. But you see, like, you also use the user object, right? So why can't you just add the donate method on the user? Because it's like the same, isn't it? Can't you just make user.donate, right? Where would you put it? What if you now have invoices? What if you now have transactions? Shouldn't you just put it in transaction or invoice.pay? Yeah, those kind of things. It's very confusing, right? It's not super clear what you have to do in those particular scenarios. And that's what I encountered. And this is why now, for the most part, I'm writing my code in service objects. Okay, so let's have some questions.
You said these service objects are based on Django Forms. So if I use Flask, would I still need Django as a dependency?
Okay, yeah. So that's a good question. So what if you're not using Django, right? So the code I wrote earlier, it was dependent on Django, right? And that's just because I'm a Django developer and that's what I'm comfortable with. But the service object pattern, it isn't really tied into a particular framework. So in your case, you're using Flask. You can actually, you have two options. Either you skip the input validation entirely, right? So you could just have like it would just pass in raw data, right? Or you can use something like, I think the forms equivalent in Flask is something called WT Forms. I checked out the documentation. It's pretty similar to how Django Forms work, but it's not, it's like its own thing. It's not dependent on any big framework. Use Flask, and then you install WT Forms, and then you can make your service objects out of that, right? So I hope that answers your question. Any more? Any more questions? Come on, just come up to the mic.
Hello. You presented us with the make donation, right? What if I also need to send an email, a text, or a push notification, something like that, to let's say one person, the admins of the app? Would it be under the same service, or would you create another service to send those notifications?
That's a really good question. Something that I didn't really explore in the example is how to compose services together, right? So in your particular case, I think I would make a send email service, right? So maybe something more specific, like send debug email or send logging email or something like that. That is also, like, you would, I guess what I'm saying is that I would create a new service called send logging email, and then I would call that service inside the other service, right? So that means now you're chaining services together, okay? And it's all reusable, and if in the future you have a different action, like say withdraw funds or something like that, you can also use that service inside that process, and now every time when somebody withdraw funds, you'll also receive an email for that, right? So, yeah.
You wouldn't put it in the form valid function, so make donation that execute, and then afterwards send email that execute?
I would say no, because again, we don't want business logics, right? You remember my talk point, right? I made you stand up, you remember? Keep business logic separate from everything else, right? So I don't like putting, like, if you have an if statement in your view, that's actually kind of a, like, that's kind of a code smell, right? Why are you deciding things like inside your view, right? So as much as possible, I would say move all of your like core code into service objects and don't put them in the views. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? More questions?
Is it correct that the service object design is having one class per function?
Wait, sige, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, yeah, the service object, as much as possible, you want to make your services kind of simple, right? They only should do only one thing by themselves, right? They might trigger other services, but by themselves, they should only do one thing, right? Like accept payment or send test email or order food or something like that, right? Okay.
Wouldn't that be a bit impractical as opposed to creating one class, for example, email handler that can send email, has many functions that the front-facing Python, the view can use. Instead of having one class for sending email, one class for composing email, one class for attaching files to the email.
Yeah, okay, so I think what you're talking about is like kind of like lower level APIs, right? So I think you can have that, and that'll definitely be useful, but you would use the email handler class inside the service object, right? So, for example, in my code, I have very complicated, like I've made a booking app. It's like a hotel reservation thing. So you have to juggle the schedules between different rooms. If people are booked in, then it's not free, that sort of thing. I actually have the logic for handling the calendar, not service objects, right? I coded it in the best way I could. I don't think it adheres to the service object pattern because service objects are more of actions, right? Actions happening. So the user doing something or you receiving, let's say coins.ph pings your web server, that sort of thing.
All right.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, I have a question for everyone. Can you raise your hand if you use Django? Raise your hand, like if you're a web developer. Oh, okay. If you use Python for machine learning, if that's your game, all right. If you use Python for, is it different? NLP. Does anybody use Python for NLP? That sort of thing. So wait. So other people didn't raise their hands at all. Like what other? What are you guys doing? Like with Python. I mean, what are you using Python for? Maybe you're just beginners, so you don't. Maybe you're still kind of new, right? Not yet sure on what your niche is. So background about myself, I'm a web developer. So this is my problem every time I make apps, is like I don't know where to put the business logic. It's always been a problem, and this thing is the thing that kind of reconciled my feelings towards that, right? So now I can just put it in service objects, plain and simple. I'm not sure how applicable the pattern is if you're not doing like web development, but I mean, try it out. Maybe it'll work. Okay, so.
Can we ask one more?
Oh yeah, okay, go ahead, go ahead.
Just a simple question. Do you think service objects make invisible coupling? You get the point? It's like separating the procedures.
I think it's really impossible to have code that isn't coupled in some way or another, right? And I think it does, right? So for example, when you're calling another service from inside a service, that's kind of like coupling. But, I mean, what else are you going to do, right?
That comes the procedural way. Sometimes developers avoid the service objects and replace them with procedures. What do you think about that?
I'm not so sure what you mean by procedures, though. So maybe we can talk about it later, like down there, because I feel like this is kind of, I don't know. Maybe I just don't know what it is, right? Maybe next year I'll be writing a talk and I'll be telling you, guys, don't use service objects. Don't use it. Right? I found this new thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Anybody else? Come on. By the way, if you have any more questions, naman, like once it's all over, you can just approach me. I'll be there in the crowd. No pressure. Okay, we're getting a lot of good questions.
Are there anything else that's like onion architecture on Django?
Onion architecture.
Yeah.
Actually, I feel like, is it similar to?
It uses service objects, but I'm a .NET developer. That's why I'm curious.
Okay, okay. So this pattern actually emerged from, not emerged from. I found out about it through reading, because I was really frustrated, guys. Like I didn't know what to do, right? How do I separate concerns, right? How do I do that? So I started reading up on different patterns, right? So one pattern it's called the hexagonal architecture, right? And then you have ports and adapters, those kinds of things. It's like, names and whatever. And I feel like service objects is just, it's kind of the same thing as them. They're just called differently, right? So I think if you want to be a real purist, you wouldn't be using Django models. You would just be using plain Python classes, right? And then you would probably use a repository pattern and all of that. But for me, that's a bit too tedious, right? So I tend to stick with service objects. But I feel like those patterns are really good if you're like doing some like really high level enterprisey kind of stuff, right? So don't just dismiss it. Yeah.
Okay lang.
Okay, cool. All right, so I think I'm done. All right, thank you guys for listening to me ramble. I have some links here. Oh yeah, by the way, I forgot. So I'm also I run a product design company. So we're actually looking for people who are comfortable with Python and front end, right? So if you're looking for like contractual work, maybe, please like approach me. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Take your selfie.
Oh yeah.
It's
Binasa niya yung- Yeah, okay. Can you guys take a selfie from the stage? Because I feel like this is one of my dreams, right? To like take a selfie from the stage.
Look hyper, guys. Look
Guys,
hyper.
I want you to look. I know you're not happy, but yeah,
Come on, guys.
happy. Right? Okay. Are you ready?
Wacky, wacky, wacky.
Wacky. 1, 2, 3. Woohoo!
Selfie in your Instagram story.
I don't have enough time for it. I'll just pretend that it's an Instagram story. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.